We chased after wind and solar and subsidies at the expense of investing in capital construction or just maintenance of the grid and maintenance of these base load power plants. So to your point, yeah, people are taking reliability into their own hands because the power may not be there when they need it.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of PowerGab, your go-to show for all things energy and environmental policy. I'm Jake Fogleman, joined by my co-host Amy Cooke, who's with us in studio today in the great state of Colorado. And this week, we want to do a little bit of a sort of a bonanza episode. It's going to be multiple topics just because a lot of things caught our attention this week that we felt were worth commenting and sharing with you all. The first is something you noticed, Amy, about Xcel Energy and its time of use rates. If you're an Xcel customer out there, you may have noticed that a lot of their bill charging strategies have transitioned to what they call time of use, where you pay more when power is most in demand. And they've already made some small adjustments to that.
Yeah, this is kind of interesting. So I could do every show about Xcel Energy, and those who have known me for a long time know that I've invested a great deal of time going after Xcel. In part because they lobby on behalf of, obviously, Xcel's interests. They're doing what a corporation would do, which is maximize their profits. So to actually, as much as angry as I get at them, the real problem lies with the legislature. So I just want to make that clear up front. But what they've done with their time of use charge, if you remember, their time of use rates were 4 hours long, and I think it was 3 to 7. Well, they have asked the Public Utilities Commission if they can change that from 3 to 9 o'clock. But they're going to do you a favor. They want to lower that rate a little bit. So you'll pay a little bit less per hour, but you're still paying more. It's just a little bit less than more, but you're paying it for a longer period of time, if that makes sense. So they're going to reduce the rate, but they're going to charge you that higher rate for a longer period of time. And one of the things that strikes me, and at the same time that came up, was this Xcel's Energy Action Day, which also came up, which was yesterday, right? The 28th. So it was yesterday, and it was the goal. People received emails saying, here's what your goal is. And it was, we were forwarded an email, and it was, the goal was to reduce usage by 2%, 2% less. And the reason is because if you have your air conditioner on and your community uses a little more energy than everybody else, they may have to tap into that reliable fossil fuel. So it's not going to be wind and solar powering your air conditioner. So you nasty people who don't want to suffer in the heat, you're causing climate change. You are expanding your carbon footprint. Also means you're probably productive, probably innovative. You're probably using your energy wisely. But this is what we get into, like with this Xcel and Colorado's energy policy. It is so myopic. It is focused on emissions only. They say this is the outcome we want, lower emissions, and then they shove everything into that. It's absolutely crazy, insane. But I think what we're seeing with this, whether it's this time of use change or these energy days of action, what you're seeing, and these are red flags, these are warnings that wind and solar cannot power the state because it cannot meet peak demand. And while having our air conditioner might make us hot and uncomfortable and crabby, when Colorado ultimately becomes a winter peaking system because we've electrified home heating and our peak demand is in the winter and wind and solar perform even less than, These are huge warning signs. These are big red flags.
That's a great point. It's exactly the point I was going to make. Up until a few years ago, there was no such thing as time of use rates. There was no such thing as an energy action day. This is all both setting the table for a future Colorado system where there's not enough power, but also getting people familiar with changing their behavior when they most need the power, like you pointed out. This is just the summer. But to your point, if we switch to winter home heating when folks need to stay warm in the winter, it's going to be all the more common. And all they're doing is getting folks used to that future scenario.
And you know what this smacks of? It's the 1970s, that energy deprivation narrative mindset. If you remember, those of us who are old enough to remember Jimmy Carter, put on a sweater, and Gerald Ford telling you, turn down your thermostat in the winter or turn it up in the summer for air conditioning. It is that energy deprivation, power scarcity. But here's really the thing. The United States, and I'd actually say Colorado too. I mean, Colorado has these fabulous, enormous God-given gifts of natural resources. And we're in a state that develops them wisely. We use them well. We're good stewards of the environment at the exact same time. So what I think of when I hear all of this, it just reminds me we are resource rich, and at the exact same time, we are policy bankrupt.
Yeah, all of those are excellent points. It does smack of energy rationing, and it's something that we're philosophically just to our core opposed to. We should be orienting towards abundance so that people can use the power they need when they want, and it can be used for uses that we can't even think of yet. We want to be able for innovation to take place. Abundance needs to be able to take place, not scarcity and alerts to, turn your thermostat down and conserve.
And it's like with AI, AI can be used to do great things, but we have to have power. It's data centers. Colorado trying to lure data centers into the state. I mean, it's a reliable, affordable power is an economic development tool. On the other hand, unreliable, unaffordable power is going to do the opposite. It will send us into a state of economic decline, and that's putting it, I would say, mildly or kind. And if we get into real energy rationing, you could see, a state of economic depression where we regress economically as opposed to move forward. This is the other thing. So they look at it through that lens. This is that narrow lens of emissions. And we've talked about this before, but I want to just read part of this to everybody. And this is what Excel said in an email. They said, this means, so in other words, what is an energy action day? Well, during hot summer days, your community, bad people, your community may be using more energy to cool their homes than usual. You greedy little things.
Heaven forbid.
I know. Oh my gosh. I want my air conditioner set at 72. And then they go on to say, this means Xcel Energy may need to tap into non-renewable energy sources to meet demand, which often produce higher carbon emissions. Forget the fact that somebody may not be able to handle high heat, or frankly, may not want to have to handle high heat.
That's right.
We have the ability to generate power reliably and affordably, and it should be beyond wind and solar, which obviously, again, red flag, screaming red flag. They're waving it, whether they want to or not, that they cannot meet demand using wind and solar.
Yep, and it's a scarcity mindset, and it just fundamentally is insane to me. But of course, we'll stay on top of this story as it develops. Whether or not they get away with these expanded time of use rates, I'm guessing they will, if the history of the PUC is any guide.
Can I add one more thing to this? Here's one more thing on this. If you only look at energy policy through the narrow lens, that just sort of myopic view of emissions, and you think public health is only wraps around emissions, then you're missing what public health is, because the worst impact on public health is no power.
Yeah.
Just look at Texas. You don't have to go very far to see what the results are if you have no power. Look at Texas, 246 dead from Winter Storm Uri because they didn't have power. The absolute worst public health is no power, not carbon emissions, but no power. And the beauty is, in the United States, we've proven we could do both, that we can reliably develop and utilize resources while cleaning the planet, cleaning the air, cleaning the water. So I just wanted to add that public health, emissions don't have a monopoly on public health.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Okay.
The other story we wanted to touch on today, there was an article in the Cowboy State Daily that kind of caught our interest because it's talking about a particular electric cooperative that is based in Colorado and how it interacts with another electric cooperative that's based in Colorado, TriState and United Power, what we're talking about. And it's all has to do with United Power pulling out of TriState and causing sort of some economic concerns, some resource concerns, not just in Colorado, but with all the various utilities that TriState serves across state lines. And it really just caught our eye because United Power is going to be paying a lot of money to leave TriState.
Yeah. So also, I want to give a plug for Cowboy State Daily. If you're interested in Wyoming, it is really the place to go. And they'll often do stories that would have an interest in Colorado. Yeah. For instance, like this one, which is in the Cowboy State Daily, co-ops in Wyoming and beyond look to United Power as template to leave TriState. So the question is, are other co-ops going to leave TriState? Well, and this I think is interesting. They say TriState didn't want to, or United Power, which serves sort of North Denver metro area.
Based in Brighton.
Yeah, Brighton, Adams County kind of area. United Power, and it's one of the larger co-ops. I think Core is probably the largest, which used to be Intermountain Rural Electric, IREA. But United Power is certainly was TriState's largest buyer. I would say that they're the largest co-op that TriState served. And what was interesting is TriState or United Power said, we don't want to go to court. We want to figure this out. So FERC came in, which is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. FERC came in and said, how much is this going to cost? Or they came up with a figure, and it was accepted by TriState and United Power. It's a big number. It's $702 million for I keep saying that, for United Power members, because it's a co-op and co-ops have memberships. So United Power members have to pay $702 million. I don't know over what length of time, but that's a lot. They aren't that big.
No.
That $702 million is not going to be easy to absorb, but they're going to do it, and their membership wanted it. So I assume they know what the impact was going to be. And the other thing is, and Mark Gabriel, who is the relatively new head of United Power, came from WAPA, Western Area Power Association or Alliance. Administration, something like that, WAPA. He said that a couple of interesting things, I think. Going forward, what United Power wants to do is get hyper-localized, which I think is a movement. I think that is actually a thing.
Yep.
And we've actually, at the Independence Institute, have talked about that a lot. About it's not a microgrid, but this localized power generation is a thing. That is, I think you're even going to see it more localized. I think you're going to see more self-generation, like with what we had Senator Lundberg on talking about. So there is that. And he also wanted more wind and solar, and all I could think of was, well, if you're in United Power, you might want to start getting ready for not being able to meet demand, because wind and solar are not going to be able to meet peak demand, and that will be coming. You should be looking at what's happening with Xcel Energy to see what's in your future.
Yeah. Now, all those were interesting factors going into the decision. At first, it was because TriState, which is heavily invested in coal, not just in Colorado, but coal in Wyoming and things like that, some of these co-ops, their members, and some of the co-op leadership were looking for more renewables, and they wanted to be the ability, to the point of hyperlocalism, they wanted the ability to build and own their own power projects, and they weren't able to do so before. And to their credit, they also are investing in a small natural gas plant, so they'll at least have that for some reliability. But I do agree that you're starting to see this trend. It's not just United Power. I think there's been 2 or 3 co-ops in Colorado that have left TriState, and you're seeing some smaller municipal utilities. They're really starting to shrink where these projects are located. He even says, Gabriel, in this, I don't really want to pay for these big, giant transmission line projects. Why don't we just use the existing transmission line projects close to home generation facilities, and we'll just get our power that way, which I think is fascinating. Not quite a microgrid, like you said, but certainly this focus on self-generation or near self-generation is an interesting development to see.
And I would agree with him on the transmission lines, right? Because those are expensive. Those are wildly expensive, and they're often not factored in when they say, we're going to build out wind and solar, or we're going to do this. They don't factor in the transmission lines needed to get there. But it sounds like, to your point, he said, we're going to invest in a natural gas plant. My guess is that's a peaker plant,
probably,
which is the most expensive way to do natural gas.
It is.
So when they tell you natural gas is expensive, it's generally a peaker plant because natural gas is dispatchable, and you're essentially just letting it sit there. But this is the interesting thing. I just pulled this up. By the way, this is kind of a cool little map for you all out there. It's called poweroutage.us. You just it'll show you where all the outages are across the country, and you can drill down to your state. So right now in Colorado, for instance, Excel has 414 people without power. And it tells you how many members they serve, or they call members tracked. Well, United Power has 106,000 members, and it's $700 million. That's just a lot.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of money to spend.
That's going to be a lot to get out of that. So, that's. I would say this too. Just be prepared, United Power members. Be prepared for that. Your Energy Action Day in the future, when you get the turn up your thermostat for your air conditioning, because otherwise we're going to have to dispatch power from our natural gas peaker plant, and that will cause carbon emissions. Forget about your own discomfort or whatever it is that's going on in your life, or maybe you're an inventor who needs power to innovate. That's probably in your future.
Yeah, and not only that, be prepared to pay that $700 million because that's going to be on your bill.
That's right.
But at least it was voluntary. They said they wanted to go this route, and they're willing to put up with the cost.
And they're doing it with their eyes wide open.
Yep. So no problem with that. And the last story we want to hit on before we wrap up today is a great piece in Substack from Robert Bryce. For folks out there that aren't familiar with Robert Bryce, we'll of course link to it in the show notes. But he's a great energy writer. And he talked about a theme that's, you might say, one of the most dominant themes on this show, specifically home generators to supplement for the increasing unreliability of the electric grid. And he talked about his own experience installing a whole home generator, and I thought it was just fascinating because that's your advice for the listeners.
I'm sure he listens to PowerGab. Yeah. I'm pretty sure he tunes in when, what? Amy and Jake said I should get a generator, so I'm investing in a generator. He is Robert Bryce, by the way. You can find him. I think it's Power Hungry on Twitter, and it's PWR Hungry on Twitter. He is an often sought after speaker, and just he's a journalist. He did a fabulous documentary too. Called Juice. So he is so well versed in the energy space, and he moved to Texas. And he said, and the title of this piece is "What's Good for Generac," and Generac does whole house generators. What's good for Generac is bad for America. We bought one anyway. After multiple blackouts, we're installing a 22 kilowatt backup generator at our house, and those are about I think he said 15,000 is what he's paying. That's about what those are. And it depends on what you need. It could be a little more, a little less, depending on if you need upgrades. Down in North Carolina, I looked at one for our house down there, and it was going to be about $12,000, but the house is much smaller. But part of that was upgrading the propane tank to accommodate it. So that's part of what you have to do is make sure either your natural gas pipeline can accommodate it or your propane tank can accommodate it. But this is one thing too that we've seen, and he has this piece, and again, as Jake said, we'll drop it in the show notes. According to the Department of Energy, what is known as, quote, major disturbances and unusual occurrences, meaning essentially outages, power outages, blackouts. This is what U.S. electricity users have seen almost 12 times the increase in blackouts since 2000. So in 2000, there were 30 of these events in a year. Now we're seeing, almost 400 events in a year. The grid has gotten far less reliable as we have shut down baseload power like coal, and we have on-time power with natural gas, but we haven't invested in nuclear. And nuclear and coal, the beauty of those two is you can store that energy right there you can store your resource right there on site. But as we have relied far more on wind, solar, and batteries, these weather-dependent, intermittent, unreliable sources, how funny, the grid becomes more unreliable. And if you're somebody who if that concerns you, or if you're, especially in the wintertime, as we've said, winter peaking system, you don't want to go 24 hours or 48 hours or longer without power. It is, cold kills far more than heat. Heat is certainly uncomfortable if you can't have your air conditioner, but you lose power in the winter, like what happened in Texas, and they're seeing more of that. By the way, Texas has, I think, more wind than any other state, by far.
And solar, too.
Yep. And they have one of these, quote, markets. Even everyone in Texas acknowledges they don't have a market. It's a faux market. So as a result, there is a lot of money chasing wind and solar subsidies, and the grid has become far less reliable.
Yeah. And speaking of market, the real market, a bit that he includes in here that I just love is that the market is responding to the increasing unreliability of the grid. You hear from a lot of people that, oh, no, our transition to renewables is going to be fine. We'll be able to do it reliably. Well, the revealed preferences of the broader public suggest that we're not buying it because Generac, he has some internal documents from Generac and their 10Ks and things like that, talking about their profitability, how much their profitability is increasing because more and more people are saying, well, if the grid's not going to be reliable, I need to take reliability into my own hands to make sure that my family's okay, my business, whatever it may be. And he talks about Generac itself, noting the red flags, the warning signs from places like NERC that we've talked about before, how all the experts are saying things are getting a little more fragile, and Generac notes that they've seen an increase in demand for their product, and they expect that to only accelerate because there really doesn't seem to be any letting up off the gas pedal for the policy transition to increasingly fragile energy sources. So,
yeah. So, to his point, what's good for Generac may be bad for America. I mean, America's grid is the largest machine, for lack of a better word, in the United States. It's massive, it's huge, and it has reliably powered the nation and the economy since roughly the 1930s, right? I mean, you can actually go back before that, but let's just say that this current iteration certainly needed maintenance, but I think instead of maintenance, we chased after wind and solar and subsidies at the expense of investing in capital construction or just maintenance of the grid and maintenance of these base load power plants. So to your point, yeah, people are taking reliability into their own hands because they don't think the power may not be there when they need it. And if you look at, I've talked about this on other shows, but there's a book out there called 5 Days at Memorial Hospital. and it's all about Hurricane Katrina and Memorial Hospital. And I'll tell you, it doesn't take long for society to devolve when you don't have power.
Yeah.
And so people are taking it into their own hands. I was talking to a friend up in Montana who has just put a whole house generator. And he said, you know what? I also have, little creek running down in the back. There, he said it's got enough of a drop. He's thinking of putting in a little turbine, just doing a little hydropower at the bottom of it. He said, he goes, I could go totally off grid. And I guess this begs the question, Jake, to some extent, if people are doing that, what does this mean for these large utilities?
Yeah.
If people are going to pull off the grid, because I'll tell you what, if time of use charges got really high and I have a whole house generator, you know what I'm doing at 3 o'clock? Switching off. But I'm going to switch on to my generator, and I'll pull myself off the grid during that time, and then I'll go back on when the rates drop again. What does this do to utilities? Could this be the death spiral of some of these utilities that have heavily invested in wind and solar? I mean, I don't know. It's just something that I think about.
No, it's theoretically interesting because not just the self-sufficiency, but as we talked about earlier in the show, the hyper-localization of the smaller co-op utilities. What does that mean for the big mega monopolies that invest in these giant capital projects? And
yeah,
it's fascinating to think about.
That are super expensive. And you know what is to prevent somebody or community, a small community, saying, you know what? We're going to do one of these hyper-local projects just for maybe it's a few people on a cul-de-sac.
Right.
Who knows? But it's fascinating to think about what that future is. And again, that's something we've talked a lot about at the Independence Institute. Mm-hmm. We talked about it well before this. You have to go back to Britt Nass days.
Yep.
Because he occasionally will send me, say, look, we were ahead of our time talking about hyper-local power generation.
As we're coming up on time here, I want to kick it over to you, of course, for the big takeaways for our listeners, but I do want to leave them with one of my own, just because there's a great quote that Robert Bryce includes in his piece that sort of sums up what we're talking about, why this is important. He quotes another great energy writer, Emmett Penny, and it's just a great line. There's no such thing as a wealthy society with a weak electrical grid, and I think that's exactly right. So leave that with you all, and then Amy, if you want to give them your takeaways.
I'll tell you, Emmett Penny, find him at the Nuclear Barbarian.
Yep.
he's phenomenal, absolutely great. So takeaways, I'm going to say warning signs, big red flags. One is that if we rely upon some of these like a large monopoly utility like Xcel in Colorado, if that's what you're going to rely on, be prepared to not have your demand met. And that it could be that you have whole blackouts like they have done before, just shut down a community, or with smart meters coming in and adjusting your thermostat because they've relied heavily on wind and solar, and they don't have the power, they don't have the supply to meet demand. So that there's that warning sign. The other one is a warning sign, but it's also, to me, innovative, and that is, I love this idea of hyper-localization and these just smaller generating units. It's a perfect place for a small modular reactor or something like that. And the signal for that could be that this could be the start of a death spiral for these large, giant monopoly utilities. But I would say, in particular, for a utility like Xcel Energy that has gone all in, solely looking at energy policy through the myopic lens of emissions. Other utilities that are reliably supplying power, they're not going to have the problem. But I think for Xcel, there are warning signs on the horizon for their business model. And the last thing, I don't have a whole house generator. I have generators, multiple at my house, but I am increasingly interested in looking at getting a whole house generator. So get your generator.
Sage advice as always. That does it for us for another episode of PowerGab. If you like what you saw here, you can head on over to iitv.org to check out our entire back catalog. We do a new episode every single week. You can also find us wherever you get audio podcasts, whether that's Spotify or Apple. And if you want to suggest future show topics or guests, reach out to us at info@powergab.org. We'd love to hear from our listeners. But until next time, we'll see you.